Give me the leftovers, and I will tell you a secret. The words stopped him cold. Just a homeless black girl, trembling, clutching her stomach in hunger, yet her voice carried something more than desperation. Her eyes didn't plead. They accused. And when she spoke again, her truth was heavier than any plate of food. She hadn't just seen a crime. She had seen him. His silence. His betrayal. This isn't the story of scraps. It's the story of a secret that shattered a family. Welcome, story lovers. Comment your city below so we know where you're watching from. It was a gray afternoon in the city, the kind of day where people hurried past one another with their eyes fixed straight ahead, desperate to reach the warmth of their homes. Among the rush of polished shoes and shopping bags sat a girl so still, she almost blended into the shadows of the alley. Her clothes hung loosely, worn thin from nights spent on concrete, her small frame curled inward as though trying to disappear. She was young, far too young to carry the weary look that lived in her eyes. Most passers-by barely noticed her. To them, she was another piece of the city's clutter, a reminder of what they refused to acknowledge. But she saw everything. From the corner where she often waited, she watched lives unfold, conversations whispered, arguments shouted, and deals made in the dark. Survival had sharpened her senses in ways no child should ever need. The hunger gnawed at her constantly. She learned to ask for scraps, never for money. People were more willing to part with what they didn't want than with what they claimed as their own. Leftovers became her word, her small plea. It was safer, less threatening, though it still earned her glares, mutters, and sometimes cruelty that cut deeper than the cold. That afternoon, she fixed her eyes on a man sitting outside a restaurant. He looked comfortable, too comfortable, dressed in clean clothes, scrolling through his phone with the absent air of someone who had never wondered where the next meal would come from. Her voice trembled as she approached him, quiet but firm enough to be heard over the street noise. Give me the leftovers, and I will tell you a secret. It was such a strange request that he looked up for the first time. A frown tugged at his face, annoyed, dismissive. To him, she was just another hungry mouth, but there was something in her tone of fragile determination that lingered in the air long after she spoke. He didn't know it yet, but that moment, the exchange of scraps for words, was about to unravel a truth that would shake his world to its core. The man sighed, his irritation plain as he slid the plate across the table. Half-eaten bread, a few pieces of chicken, and cold vegetables clattered together in front of her. He didn't look at her again, instead returning to the glowing screen in his hand as though the world outside it barely existed. For him, it was nothing more than an act of casual dismissal. But for her, those scraps meant survival. She ate quickly, every bite swallowed with the urgency of someone who hadn't tasted food in days. Yet her eyes never left him, studying his features with a strange intensity. When she finally spoke, her voice cracked, both fragile and resolute. She whispered about something she had seen, something she shouldn't have. A night not long ago, in the very streets where she slept, she had witnessed men arguing violently. One of them had shouted a name, his name. She described details with the kind of clarity that only comes from fear. The color of the car, the broken streetlight above, the sharp smell of gasoline that lingered long after. The man froze. His fork hovered midair, his chest tightening. She couldn't possibly know that. The event she described wasn't public. It was family business, a secret buried deep beneath appearances of respectability. His brother had been involved in an incident, something that was swept quickly under the rug with money and influence. No one was supposed to know, but she had seen. Her words tumbled out faster now, as though she feared being silenced before finishing. She spoke of shouting, of a figure being struck, of a body dragged into the shadows. She described how she hid behind trash bins, her tiny frame shaking as she tried not to breathe. What she revealed was more than a crime. It was an exposure, a mirror reflecting corruption, betrayal, and the ugly truth of what power allowed men like his family to get away with. He felt anger rising, not at her, but at the horrifying realization that his brother's secret was no longer safe. The girl's presence threatened the carefully constructed facade his family had built. His first instinct was denial, to dismiss her words as the ramblings of a hungry child desperate for attention. Yet the precision of her details gnawed at him. She knew too much. People around the restaurant had begun to glance their way. Her trembling words, though quiet, carried a weight that seemed to pull attention. Whispers stirred. Curious eyes flicked toward the girl and the man she confronted. He felt exposed, as though the walls were closing in on him. The girl, however, seemed unshaken by the stares. Her hunger was real, but so was her courage. For too long, people like her were silenced, ignored, erased, treated as invisible. But in this moment, she refused invisibility. She demanded to be heard. The man's thoughts raced. If her story spread, it wouldn't just ruin his brother. It would taint everything, his family's business, reputation, and legacy. He imagined headlines, accusations, the unraveling of power built over decades. And here sat the key to it all, a frail girl with dirt on her cheeks and fire in her eyes. He leaned forward, finally truly looking at her. For the first time, he noticed the scars, small but telling, etched into her skin by years of neglect and cruelty. She wasn't just recounting an event. She was exposing a world of injustice, a world he had never truly seen because he had never needed to. Yet as her story deepened, his heartbeat quickened. He realized with chilling clarity that her secret was not merely about his brother. It was about him, too. He had been there that night, even if he hadn't acted. His silence had made him complicit. And now the silence was breaking. The air around them seemed to thicken, every sound from the bustling street fading into a distant hum. The girl's last words struck him like a hammer. She had not only seen his brother, she had seen him. His face, his hesitation, his choice to look away when a man was beaten and dragged into the darkness. The fork slipped from his fingers, clattering against the plate. People turned their heads at the noise, but he barely noticed. His pulse thundered in his ears as her trembling voice echoed through him. The secret he had buried, the memory he had convinced himself didn't matter, was now standing before him in the form of a homeless child. She leaned closer, her eyes glistening not just with hunger, but with the heavy weight of truth. "You watched," she whispered. "You let it happen." The words sliced deeper than any accusation. He felt stripped bare, every layer of comfort and privilege torn away. He saw himself reflected in her gaze, not as the successful man he pretended to be, but as a coward who chose silence when courage was required. Around them, silence stretched. He wanted to protest, to deny it, but the memory was undeniable. The flickering streetlight, the muffled cries, his brother's rage. His own frozen body refuses to intervene. For the first time, he saw her not as a beggar, but as a witness, one who carried the power to unravel everything. His stomach turned with dread. If her story spread, he would lose more than his reputation. He would lose the illusion of who he believed himself to be. Her final whisper shattered him. The truth always finds its voice. He sat frozen, the food untouched, his phone forgotten. The girl's words lingered like an echo he couldn't silence. For years, he had built his life on comfort and appearances, telling himself that some battles weren't his to fight. But now, the living proof of his silence sat across from him. A child forced to survive in shadows because people like him looked away. Her story did not just expose his brother's crime. It exposed the sickness of indifference, the quiet complicity that allowed cruelty to thrive. He realized then that racism wasn't always loud or violent. Sometimes it lived in silence, choosing to ignore suffering because it was easier. The girl wiped her mouth with the back of her hand, her eyes still locked on his. She hadn't begged for sympathy. She had demanded truth. And in that truth, he felt something shift inside him. Guilt, yes, but also a flicker of clarity. He couldn't undo what had happened, but he could no longer pretend ignorance. As she stood to leave, her small frame seemed taller than the man who sat trembling. She walked back toward the shadows, but she left behind a burden that now belonged to him. He carried it like a weight on his chest, heavy with the knowledge that silence was no longer an option. This wasn't just her story. It was the story of countless lives dismissed, voices ignored, truths buried. The question burned in his mind, one that should burn in ours, too. How many more secrets will remain hidden because people choose not to see? Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more powerful stories. And remember, silence too has consequences.